On a blazing afternoon along Route 66, two motorcycles collide, one ridden by Keanu Reeves, the other by a furious biker ready to fight. The crowd braces for violence, but Keanu simply asks, "Do you want some water?" No one knew that question would turn rage into redemption and change both men forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sun. The asphalt shimmered like liquid glass, and the air trembled with the kind of silence only broken by wind and engines. Keanu Reeves rode alone on his black arch motorcycle, the chrome glinting as if it were on fire. His jeans were faded, his leather jacket scuffed at the shoulders, and a faint trail of dust followed him like a memory he couldn't quite leave behind. There was no film crew, no entourage, no destination, just the road and the rhythm of his breathing under the helmet. He had left Los Angeles 2 days earlier, needing space from noise and fame, from people who looked at him but rarely saw him. Out here, no one cared who he was. He wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star. He was just another rider chasing distance, chasing quiet. Every mile peeled something off his mind. The pressure, the grief, the relentless pace of a world that never stopped demanding. The road was his sanctuary. As the miles rolled under his tires, the world felt simpler. Cactus fields stood like sentinels in the distance. A hawk circled above, slow and precise. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the whisper of wind through his visor. But even in that peace, a strange feeling lingered, an intuition that the calm wouldn't last. The desert was too still, too heavy, like the world holding its breath. After an hour, he spotted a small gas station tucked beside a rusted diner sign that read, "Earl's Route 66 stop since 1954. The red paint was peeling, but the place had life. A few pickup trucks were parked out front, and a group of bikers leaned against their Harleys, laughing too loud for the empty road around them. The kind of men who looked like the world had burned them a few times, tattoos faded from sun and regret. Keanu slowed down, pulled into the lot, and killed the engine. The sudden quiet felt sharp after the hum of the ride. He removed his helmet, shaking loose his dark hair dampened by sweat. The heat hit him immediately dry, searing, unrelenting. He could taste the dust in the air. Inside the small convenience store, the air conditioner struggled to keep up. The place smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee grounds. Keanu grabbed a cold bottle of water from the fridge, twisted the cap, and took a slow sip. Behind the counter, an elderly man nodded in greeting. "Hot day to be riding," the man said, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. Keanu smiled politely. "That's what makes it good," he replied. The old man chuckled, clearly not recognizing him. "Guess so. Ride safe, son. These roads can get unpredictable." Keanu thanked him and stepped back outside, the sunlight hitting him like a wall. He leaned against his bike, drinking the rest of his water, watching as the bikers nearby revved their engines louder, showing off for no one in particular. Their laughter carried across the lot, harsh and hollow. One of them glanced at Keanu, a quick, assessing look, the kind that measured another man's presence before deciding whether to challenge it. The hum of tension was faint, but it was there the kind that only certain men could sense on an open road. Two worlds circling, one calm, one chaotic. They didn't know it yet, but those worlds were about to collide. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of gasoline and fried food from the diner next door. Keanu stood still for a moment, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the sky met the cracked road. The silence between the engine revs was the kind that spoke of isolation, of stories too heavy to tell. He wasn't there for company. He was there to breathe. But company found him anyway. The group of bikers stepped out from the shade of the gas station awning. 5 of them, all wearing worn leather vests with the same faded patch on the back Iron Vulture's motorcycle club. Their leader, a tall man with a rough beard and sunglasses, lifted a cigarette to his lips. His voice was deep, gravelly. "Nice ride you got there," he said, nodding toward Keanu's arch. Custom build? Keanu glanced at him, polite but reserved. Yeah, built it myself, with a friend back in LA. The man whistled. Looks expensive. Not the kind of bike you see on this side of the state. There was no malice in his tone yet, but something in his smirk hinted at the need to provoke. The other bikers circled around their own bikes, laughing among themselves. They weren't bad men, just restless ones. Keanu recognized that energy immediately. He had met it 100 times before. Men carrying too much pain, trying to bury it under sound and speed. He nodded once. Every road's the same once you're on it, he said quietly. The man's grin faded. That's so. Before things could turn into a pissing contest, the sound of a semi-truck's horn blared nearby, shaking the air. Keanu looked away, adjusting his gloves, preparing to leave. He didn't have time for ego games, but as he mounted his bike, one of the younger bikers, maybe mid-20s, stepped forward. His name was Rex Dalton, though Keanu didn't know that yet. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression tight. Something burned behind them, a mixture of exhaustion and fury. Hey, Rex said sharply. You some kind of celebrity or something? You look familiar. Keanu gave a soft shrug. Just another guy on the road. Rex scoffed, shaking his head. Yeah, right. You've got that face. The kind that doesn't belong out here with the rest of us. The older man muttered, Let it go, Rex. But he didn't. Keanu didn't respond. He strapped his helmet on and started the engine. The low growl filled the air. For a moment, it seemed that would be the end of it, a brief encounter between strangers. But fate had other plans. Rex climbed onto his own bike, glaring at Keanu. We'll see how that thing runs on the open road, he said under his breath. Keanu didn't answer. He simply revved the throttle, eased out of the lot, and rolled back onto the highway. The group followed moments later, their engines roaring like thunder chasing calm. The sun was dropping, the heat still radiating from the ground. Ahead, the desert stretched forever wide, golden, merciless. Behind him, distant engines echoed, like anger waiting to catch up. Something was coming. The road wound through a stretch of red mesas and flat desert plains. The air shimmered, turning the horizon into a blur of gold and gray. Keanu kept his speed steady, focused on the curve ahead, not the noise behind. But the rumble of engines grew closer. The iron vultures weren't done yet. In his mirror, he saw them 5 black silhouettes cutting through the heat waves, tires chewing the asphalt like hounds on a chase. Rex led the pack, his bike weaving too close to Keanu's rear tire. Every few seconds he revved, loud enough to make his challenge known. Keanu didn't flinch. He'd seen tempers boil like this before. On movie sets, in cities, in life. The difference was that here, there were no walls to protect anyone. Just sky, road, and whatever choices a man made in the heat of the moment. Rex pulled alongside him, shouting something over the wind words lost to the roar. Keanu turned his head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes through the visor. What he saw wasn't just anger. It was grief deep, raw, and aimless. The kind that burns until it finds someone to hurt. For a long mile they rode side by side, the desert sun painting everything in fire. Then, at a bend near an abandoned rest stop, Rex cut too close. Their handlebars nearly touched. Keanu hit the brake slightly, steady hands saving both bikes from collision. Tires screeched, dust flew. They stopped at the shoulder, engines growling between them. For a few tense seconds, the world held still, the heat, the silence, the eyes of 2 men separated by pain they didn't yet understand. Keanu lifted his visor. His face was calm, his voice steady. You all right? Rex didn't answer. His chest rose and fell like a piston. The rest of the bikers pulled up, watching. None of them spoke. The only sound was the ticking of hot metal cooling in the sun. In that quiet, something deeper than anger began to stir. Something neither of them could name yet. The road, endless and empty, waited for what would happen next. The road narrowed into a stretch of cracked asphalt, lined with faded billboards and dying mesquite trees. The sky burned orange and white, the heat waves rising like smoke. Keanu kept his pace, even, steady, his thoughts lost somewhere between the hum of the engine and the weightless silence of the desert. He had no idea that the moment waiting ahead would become a story retold by millions. A few miles past the last gas station, a roar broke through the stillness. In his mirror, he saw a single rider coming fast, the kind of reckless speed that spoke more of emotion than thrill. The biker wore a torn leather jacket with a large skull patch stretched across the back, the edges darkened by sun and oil. The figure leaned low over the handlebars, cutting through the heat like a blade. Keanu moved slightly to the right to give space, but the biker didn't take it. Instead, the man swerved too close, clipping Keanu's side mirror. It snapped back with a sharp crack, and his bike wobbled violently for a puncture. Second, he gripped the handlebars, steadying it before it could tip. The adrenaline hit like a jolt of electricity, but his face stayed calm. He slowed, checking his balance, then looked ahead. The other rider had already pulled over on the shoulder, kicking down his stand hard enough to make dust fly. The man ripped off his helmet, threw it against his seat, and turned toward Keanu with fury in his eyes. Mid-30s, rugged, a jaw that looked clenched from years of tension. Tattoos curled up his forearms, flames, names, a cross. But what stood out most were his eyes. They were bloodshot, hollowed, like someone who hadn't slept or cried properly in days. Keanu slowed and parked a few feet away. The man's voice cut through the dry air. "You trying to kill me?" Keanu took off his helmet, his hair damp, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" The biker took a step forward, veins rising in his neck. "Don't play dumb. You cut me off back there." Keanu shook his head once, quiet. "I didn't see you until you were beside me. You came up fast." The man's anger boiled over. "Don't tell me what I did. You think just because you're on that fancy custom bike you own the road?" Keanu said nothing. He could have explained, could have matched tone for tone, but instead, he just stood there, calm, composed, letting the man's fury burn itself out. From across the road, the sound of a diner door creaked open. A few travelers stepped outside to watch, coffee cups in hand. A trucker leaned on his rig, squinting into the sun. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Keanu looked at the man and spoke softly, his voice low enough that it carried weight. "You want some water?" The question hit harder than a punch. The biker blinked, caught off guard. His expression twisted between confusion and disbelief. "What?" Keanu reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a half-full bottle, and held it out. "It's hot. You look like you could use it." The man's jaw flexed. He slapped the bottle from Keanu's hand, sending it rolling across the dirt. "I don't need your pity," the crowd murmured. Keanu didn't move. He just looked at the man not in judgment, but with something quieter. Something like concern. That silence unnerved everyone more than shouting ever could. For a long moment, the only sound was the rattle of the fallen bottle rolling against gravel. The desert wind carried it a few feet before it stopped, spinning once in the dust. Rex stood frozen, his chest heaving. Every muscle in his body screamed for a fight. But Keanu's stillness robbed him of direction. He wasn't used to people meeting rage with quiet. It felt unnatural, like screaming at a mirror that refused to echo. "Say something," Rex growled. "You just gonna stand there?" Keanu looked at him steadily. "I already did." The words weren't sharp, but they landed deep. Rex turned away, pacing in short bursts, running both hands over his face as if trying to scrape something off. The anger that brought him there suddenly had nowhere to go. One of the men outside the diner called out, "Hey, you guys all right?" Rex shouted back without turning. "Mind your business." His voice cracked halfway through. The sound wasn't power, it was pain. The trucker beside the door muttered something to himself and went back inside. The rest stayed at the windows, pretending not to stare. Keanu picked up the bottle, dusted it off, and set it on his seat. "You thirsty man, that's all." Rex glared. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" "I'm not trying to," Keanu replied. "I just don't see a reason to make things worse." That calm tone, gentle but unyielding, threw Rex further off balance. He opened his mouth to yell again, but the words tangled in his throat. His hands trembled slightly. The tattoos on his forearms, once proud symbols of rebellion, now looked like scars from another life. Keanu took a step closer, not in threat, but understanding. "You having a rough day?" Rex laughed bitterly. "You could say that." His laugh broke halfway through. He looked away toward the horizon, where the road stretched into nothing. "You ever feel like everything you touch just falls apart?" He waited until the question hung long enough to matter. "Yeah," he said finally. "More times than I can count." Something in the tone made Rex look up. He expected judgment or pity, but there was neither, just recognition. "You don't even know me," Rex muttered. "Maybe not," Keanu said softly. "But I know what pain looks like when it's got nowhere to go." That line hit something raw inside him. His shoulders fell, and for the first time, he seemed smaller than his anger. The crowd across the road grew silent again. It was no longer a spectacle, it was something sacred unraveling in public. Rex stared at the dirt. "He died last week," he said finally. The words were small, almost swallowed by the wind. Keanu waited. "Who?" "My brother," Rex whispered. "I was supposed to ride with him that day, but I yelled at him instead. He never made it home." The confession came like a storm breaking open after too long. His voice shook, his breath shallow. The anger melted, leaving only grief. Keanu stepped forward slowly, his tone steady. "You loved him. That's why it hurts." Rex's eyes glistened, and for the first time, he didn't hide it. Rex turned away, pressing his palms into his eyes, but the tears came anyway. The weight he had carried for days cracked open on that empty road. His breath hitched, broken by guilt that had no outlet until now. "I keep seeing his face," he said. "Every time I close my eyes, every time I start my bike, I hear his voice. He told me to slow down, and I told him to shut up. That was the last thing I said to him." Keanu stood beside his motorcycle, silent but present. There was no speech to fix something like that. Sometimes, all a man could do was listen and let another man breathe again. The crowd across the road had gone completely quiet. Even the hum of the highway faded beneath the sound of the desert wind. Rex's knees trembled as he leaned on his bike for balance. "You don't understand," he said through gritted teeth. "He was my little brother. I was supposed to take care of him. Instead, I buried him." Keanu took a slow breath. "I do understand," he said quietly. "You're not the only one who's lost someone they loved." Rex looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no fame in Keanu's expression, no trace of the movie star that millions adored. Just a man who had seen darkness and chosen not to spread it. That realization disarmed Rex more than any argument could have. "You could have hit me back," Rex said softly. "You could have called the cops or punched me. Why didn't you?" Keanu tilted his head, thinking for a moment before answering. "Because I've learned that hitting back doesn't stop the pain. It just keeps it alive." Rex swallowed hard. "So what am I supposed to do with it?" Keanu reached down, picked up the bottle of water again, and placed it gently on Rex's bike seat. "Start by drinking some water. Then, start by not riding angry." It wasn't a lecture. It was a lifeline disguised as simplicity. Rex stared at the bottle for a long moment, then finally nodded. His hands shook as he twisted the cap open. He drank slowly, like a man waking from a long nightmare. Behind them, one of the bikers who had followed Rex finally approached. "You good, man?" he asked cautiously. Rex didn't look away from Keanu. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "I think I will be." Keanu gave him a small nod, then put his helmet back on. Before starting his bike, he looked over once more. "Take care of yourself, Rex." Rex blinked in surprise. "How'd you know my name?" Keanu smiled faintly. "You're wearing it on your vest." Rex looked down at the patch sewn above the skull emblem. The name R. Dalton faded from sun and time. For the first time, he smiled back small, fragile, but real. Keanu started his engine. The deep rumble filled the quiet like a heartbeat. He pulled onto the highway again, the sun reflecting off the chrome as the dust rose behind him. Rex stood there watching until he disappeared into the horizon. For the first time in a week, the road didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a chance to begin again. The sound of the engines faded into the background until only the wind remained. Dust drifted lazily across the road, catching the late sunlight. Rex stood there, breathing hard, the anger in his eyes flickering like a dying flame. He had shouted himself empty. The silence around him felt unnatural. Everyone expected Keanu to react, to defend himself, to fight back. But he didn't. Keanu just looked at him, calm, grounded, as if the heat and shouting hadn't touched him at all. His voice came again, steady and clear. "You want some water?" Rex blinked, confused, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't what his fury had been waiting for. He expected a challenge, a glare, maybe even a threat. Instead, he got kindness, the kind that doesn't fit in a fight. "What?" he muttered, unsure if he'd heard right. Keanu reached into the small saddlebag beside his bike and pulled out another bottle, still cold with condensation. He held it out with a simple gesture. "Here, it's a long ride in this heat. You'll dehydrate." The world around them seemed to pause. A couple near the diner window stopped eating. The sheriff's cruiser that had been rolling down the opposite lane slowed, then passed without stopping. Even the air seemed to thicken, heavy with disbelief. Rex stared at the bottle, then at the man offering it. His jaw tightened. "You think I need your charity?" he spat. Keanu didn't lower his hand. His expression didn't change. "I think you need water," he said softly. The softness infuriated Rex. He slapped the bottle from Keanu's hand. It hit the pavement, split open, and water spilled across the dust like blood disappearing into sand. A few gasps came from the crowd. One of Rex's biker friends shifted uncomfortably beside his Harley, muttering something under his breath. Keanu didn't flinch. He looked down at the spilled water for a moment, then back up at Rex. His voice stayed low, calm, and even. "That's okay. I've got more." Rex took a step back, breathing hard. His knuckles were white, his teeth clenched, his pulse visible at his temple. "Why aren't you mad?" he demanded. "You think you're better than me? Some kind of saint?" Keanu shook his head. "No, I just know what anger does. It eats you alive. I'm not feeding it." The words settled into the silence, like stones dropped into a deep well. The crowd didn't move. Rex's fury trembled, then faltered for just a second, replaced by something else: confusion. He wanted to hate the man in front of him, but Keanu wasn't giving him a reason to. And that, somehow, was worse. Rex's hands trembled as he stood there, the rage that had once fueled him now flickering out like a dying engine. His mind told him to stay angry, to fight, to prove something, but his body no longer listened. It was as if Keanu's stillness had drained the energy right out of him. The man in front of him wasn't just calm, he was unshakable. The heat shimmered between them, blurring the edges of everything. A bead of sweat rolled down Rex's temple, but he didn't wipe it away. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "You don't even know me, man. Don't act like you do." Keanu's reply came quiet, sincere. "You're right, I don't. But I can tell you're hurting." Rex laughed sharply, the sound empty. "Hurting? You don't know what that word means." He took a step closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You stand there like you've got all the answers. You think talking soft makes you better than me?" Keanu's eyes didn't waver. "No, it just means I'm not trying to win anything." That line disarmed Rex more than any punch could have. He wanted to throw a fist, to feel something solid hit back, but the air between them stayed thick with quiet. Keanu's calm felt heavier than anger itself. It reflected every ounce of grief Rex had buried, showing him what he had become. Rex turned away, shaking his head, trying to swallow the lump rising in his throat. "You should just get back on your bike, man, before I do something I regret." Keanu didn't move. "You won't." The certainty in that voice cut deeper than any threat. For a long second, Rex didn't breathe. He stared at the ground, fists tightening, jaw twitching. The silence pressed against him until he couldn't stand it. He kicked the dirt, sending dust into the air, and muttered, "Why won't you just yell back? Make it easy." Keanu stepped forward, just close enough to be heard clearly. "Because I'm not your enemy." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They hung there, between two men who had no reason to meet, yet every reason to understand each other. The crowd behind the diner window exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something shifting. Rex looked up finally, his anger dimming under the weight of those 5 words. The fire in his chest flickered once more, then began to fade into something else: exhaustion, sorrow, maybe even shame. He didn't know it yet, but that silence, the one he'd fought so hard against, was about to change him. The minutes dragged like hours as the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the highway. The heat was no longer scorching, but the tension still clung to the air. Rex stood motionless, his breath uneven, his body trembling not from rage anymore, but from the sudden void left behind when anger has nowhere else to go. Keanu didn't speak. He simply stepped aside, allowing the silence to breathe. It was a silence that carried more truth than any words could. The sound of a loose sign, creaking in the wind, filled the space between them. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across the road. Life continued, indifferent and calm, and somehow that made everything heavier. Rex finally muttered, "You don't get it. People don't talk to me like that. Not out here. They either fight me or leave." Keanu's tone was soft but unwavering. "Maybe that's why you're still angry. You've only met people trying to fight back." Rex's brow furrowed. The words dug into him in a way fists never could. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to find an answer. His throat tightened. "I don't need your sympathy," he said, but the edge in his voice was gone. It came out, thin, tired. Keanu took a step closer, his boots crunching on gravel. "I'm not giving you sympathy. I'm giving you a moment." Rex blinked, caught off guard. "A moment?" "To stop fighting ghosts," Keanu said. That line sank deep. The sun dipped lower, bathing the scene in gold. The onlookers at the diner window said nothing. They knew they were watching something rare, a man breaking, and another quietly helping him put the pieces back together without a single word of blame. Rex looked away, staring down the long stretch of road. The same road where his brother had crashed. The same road he'd been punishing himself on ever since. His breathing slowed, his fists unclenched. The anger that had once defined him now felt foreign, like a language he no longer wanted to speak. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, Rex said, "You don't even know me, and you're treating me better than I deserve." Keanu nodded once. Maybe that's the point. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of loss, understanding, and something that felt like forgiveness. Rex exhaled, the sound shaky but real. He didn't realize it yet, but this was the first time he had truly breathed since his brother died. And Keanu, without a word, knew it. Rex's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. His arms hung limply by his sides as the adrenaline drained away, leaving only exhaustion. The fury that had once burned behind his eyes had vanished, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He stepped backward, his boot catching against a small rock, and leaned against his bike to steady himself. The chrome reflected the setting sun, but his reflection looked like a stranger, sweat-soaked, shaking, broken. "You don't get it," he muttered under his breath. His voice cracked, the sound raw, stripped of its earlier aggression. "You don't get what it's like to watch everything disappear." Keanu didn't move closer yet. He just stood near enough that Rex knew he was listening. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was waiting soft, patient, ready. Rex's hand brushed over the tank of his motorcycle. His fingers lingered on a small dent near the handlebar, and his breathing hitched. "It's his," he said finally, the words falling like gravel. My brother's bike. I fixed it after the crash. Couldn't stand seeing it in pieces, so I kept riding it. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. He took a small step closer, slow and steady. You said he died a week ago? Rex nodded once, his jaw tightening. Yeah, I wasn't there. I should have been. I was too busy being mad over something stupid. I told him to get lost, to stop riding like a kid. He left that night, and his words broke apart. He swallowed hard, but his throat refused to cooperate. They said he lost control on a turn just outside Winslow. They said it was quick. The last word crumbled out of him. He pressed his fist against his mouth, trying to keep himself from shaking, but it didn't work. His knees bent slightly, his body no longer strong enough to hold the weight of what he carried. He sank against the side of his bike, his forehead resting on his arms. Keanu bent down slowly and reached for the fallen water bottle from earlier. He brushed off the dirt and placed it upright on the pavement again, next to Rex's boot. He didn't say much, just that small gesture, quiet but full of meaning. Rex didn't look up. He was 23, he said, his voice muffled. We were supposed to ride together that weekend. I had it all planned. Now, I don't even know what to do with myself. I just keep riding, because if I stop, I start thinking. And thinking hurts worse than the crash. The air grew still again. The desert wind calmed, as if listening too. Keanu crouched beside him, his shadow stretching long across the road. You loved him, he said softly. That means he's not gone. Rex finally looked up, tears streaking through the dust on his face. His lips trembled. You really believe that? Keanu nodded. Yeah, I do. The light shifted as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, throwing streaks of gold and red across the road. Rex wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand, but the tears kept coming. His breathing was heavy, uneven, like each inhale was a battle. You don't understand what it's like, he said again, his voice shaking. We had nothing growing up. He was all I had. And now. He stopped mid-sentence, pressing his palms against his forehead. Now I've got no one. Keanu stayed crouched beside him, his gaze steady and gentle. You've got yourself, he said quietly. That's still something. Rex let out a rough laugh that turned into a sob halfway through. Myself? What good is that? I messed up everything. He looked up to me, and I wasn't even worth it. He grabbed a handful of dirt and crushed it in his fist, letting it fall between his fingers. I keep replaying it in my head, the argument. The door slamming, his taillight fading down the road. I told him I'd catch up to him. I never did. Keanu listened without interrupting. He didn't try to offer easy words or force comfort. He just let the man's grief spill out into the desert air, giving it room to exist. That was something few people ever did. Rex's voice grew softer. He was always the calm one. Always told me I had too much fire. Said one day it'd burn me from the inside. Guess he was right. Keanu shook his head. No one's right or wrong about pain. We just carry it differently. Rex looked at him, confused. How are you so calm about this? If someone hurt you, if someone took your family, you'd lose it too. Keanu's eyes reflected the dimming sky. I already have, he said simply. More than once. The honesty in that line silenced Rex. He searched Keanu's face for something: anger, sadness, maybe proof that the man was bluffing, but all he saw was truth. Keanu placed a hand lightly on the seat of Rex's bike, not touching him, just grounding the moment. You loved him, he said. That means he's not gone. You carry him every time you ride. Rex's shoulders began to shake again. He let out a long, guttural cry, the kind that had been buried for too long. It echoed through the still desert, rolling off the pavement and into the distance. It wasn't loud or wild, just painfully human. Keanu stayed beside him, silent, until the crying eased into quiet sobs. The bottle of water glistened in the sand beside them, half empty, but upright, as if it had been waiting for this moment of stillness. The sun hung low now. A red coin, sinking behind the mesas. The highway was empty, except for the two men and the hum of cooling metal. Rex's sobs slowed until they became small, broken breaths. His hands, still trembling, rested on the gas tank of the motorcycle that once belonged to his brother. The reflection of his face in the chrome was enough to break his heart all over again. Keanu stayed kneeling beside him, quiet, steady, a solid presence in the middle of the desert. He didn't rush him or offer hollow comfort. He just let the grief live there for a while. It was the kind of pain that needed space, no explanations, no quick fixes, just air and silence. Finally, Rex spoke, his voice low and rough. He used to say the road made him feel free. I never understood that. I always thought he was running from something. He paused, glancing at Keanu. Now I know he was running toward peace. Guess I'm still chasing it. Keanu nodded slightly. Peace isn't something you catch, he said. It's something you learn to ride with. Rex gave a faint, tired laugh. You sound like my brother. He was always saying stuff like that. His laughter faded, replaced by a look of pure exhaustion. I keep thinking if I ride long enough, I'll see him again. Like maybe he's waiting for me at the next stop. Keanu stood slowly, brushing the dust from his jeans. Maybe he is, he said softly. Just not in the way you think. Rex frowned, confused. Keanu looked out at the horizon, the last of the sunlight painting the clouds pink and gold. People we love, they don't vanish when they're gone. They stay in the way we talk, the choices we make, the things we fix instead of break. You carry him every mile you ride. Rex followed his gaze, the road stretching endlessly before them. You really believe that? He asked. Keanu turned to him. I don't just believe it, I live it. Those words hit something deep inside Rex, something beyond guilt or sorrow. For the first time, his breathing steadied. The lines of anger on his face softened into something vulnerable, something almost peaceful. He looked down at the bottle of water beside his boot. Slowly, he picked it up, twisted the cap, and drank. It wasn't just thirst, it was acceptance. Thanks for not walking away. Keanu smiled faintly. You didn't need someone to walk away. You needed someone to stop. The desert wind rose again, soft and warm, carrying away the last of the day's heat. Two men stood there, one finding peace, the other making sure it stayed. For the first time since the crash, Rex didn't feel lost. He felt seen. The sun had nearly vanished when a streak of blue and red light cut through the stillness. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up slowly, tires crunching over the gravel. The flashing lights turned the desert road into a blur of color, washing over Keanu and Rex like waves of red dusk. Someone from the diner must have called it in, thinking a fight had broken out. The car door opened, and a heavy-set man in his 50s stepped out. His tan uniform looked crisp despite the heat, and his mirrored sunglasses reflected the two men standing by the bikes. His right hand hovered near his holster as he called out, "Evening, gentlemen. Everything all right here?" Rex stiffened, quickly wiping his face with his sleeve, trying to hide the evidence of his tears. His voice cracked as he answered, "Yeah, we're fine." The sheriff didn't look convinced. His gaze flicked from the scuffed pavement to the dent in Rex's bike to Keanu's calm expression. "Got a report of shouting and possible assault," he said, stepping closer. "Mind telling me what's going on?" Keanu nodded slightly, his voice even and respectful. "No assault, sir. Just a misunderstanding between riders. We sorted it out." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You sure about that?" "Yes," Keanu said. "No one's hurt." The officer's hand dropped from his holster, but his posture stayed alert. "All right then. Let's make sure there's no damage that needs reporting." Rex glanced nervously at Keanu, unsure what to say. The last thing he wanted was trouble with the law. He'd had enough of that in his past. Keanu sensed his unease and stepped forward. "It was a near miss," he said calmly. "He swerved a little too close," I overcorrected. And we both stopped to talk it out. No harm done. The sheriff studied him closely for a moment, then blinked. "Hold on. You're..." He paused, tilting his head. "You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" Keanu gave a small smile, almost Sheepish. Sometimes, he said. The sheriff chuckled, his tone softening instantly. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't expect to see you out here on Route 66. Keanu shrugged. I like the quiet roads. The tension broke. The sheriff's shoulders relaxed, and he removed his sunglasses, tucking them into his shirt pocket. He turned to Rex, his tone now more casual. So, you two good? No bruises? No busted bikes? Rex nodded quickly. Yeah, we're good. My fault, honestly. Keanu glanced at him, offering a small nod of approval. The sheriff's expression shifted slightly as he took in the scene, the open bottle of water, the scuffed pavement, the weary look in Rex's eyes. Something about it told him this wasn't a typical roadside argument. He lowered his voice. All right, but next time, fellas, let's keep it cool. Roads like this can turn bad fast. Keanu smiled faintly. We've learned that lesson. The sheriff leaned against the side of his cruiser, the flashing lights dimming to a steady glow. He looked between the two men, noticing how the tension in the air wasn't anger anymore. It was something gentler, heavier. You two really worked this out without throwing punches? He asked, half curious, half amused. Keanu smiled faintly. Talking's faster than fighting, he said. The sheriff chuckled, a deep, genuine laugh that broke the still air. Can't argue with that, though I'll admit, that's not usually how it goes on this stretch of road. He looked toward the diner. Folks around here see a scene like that. They expect broken noses and tire marks. Not. He gestured vaguely toward the two of them. Whatever this is. Rex rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. His face was still streaked from tears and dust. Guess I got carried away, he said quietly. The sheriff nodded, studying him with a mix of authority and empathy. Son, happens more than you'd think. I've seen too many good men. Let the road eat 'em alive. Glad to see someone pulled you out before it got worse. Rex looked down, his voice barely audible. Yeah, I guess I got lucky. Keanu's voice came calm, almost reflective. We all get lost sometimes. What matters is what we do after. The sheriff turned toward him, that line catching his attention. He crossed his arms, nodding slowly. You know, I haven't heard something like that since my church days. You preach? Keanu shook his head lightly. No, just listen. That made the sheriff grin. Might be more effective than preaching if you ask me. He reached for his notepad, flipping it open. All right, let's make this official. You two want to file a report for the record? Just in case? Rex shifted uneasily, shaking his head. Nah, that's not necessary. Keanu echoed him. Accidents happen. No damage, no harm. What matters is we walk away better than we came. The sheriff looked at him for a long moment, then closed the notepad without writing a word. That's not something I hear often out here. He extended his hand to Keanu first. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Mr. Reeves. Keanu accepted the handshake, firm and warm. Just trying to keep the peace, sir. Then the sheriff turned to Rex. You too, son. Don't let today be another reason to beat yourself up. Let it be where things start getting better. Rex met his eyes and nodded once. Yes, sir. The sheriff smiled, tipping his hat before heading back to his cruiser. Well, I'll be sure to tell dispatch they can stand down. Just a lesson in patience on Route 66. As the lights faded into the distance, the night settled back in. The stars began to pierce the sky one by one, and the quiet that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was peaceful. Keanu turned to Rex. See? Not every mistake needs punishment. Rex let out a slow, shaky breath. Yeah, sometimes it just needs understanding. The fading sound of the sheriff's cruiser grew smaller until it disappeared entirely, leaving only the whisper of wind over the asphalt. The last light of the day brushed over the road, painting the world in copper and quiet. Keanu stood beside his bike, his hands resting on the handlebars, while Rex remained seated on his brother's motorcycle, his shoulders finally starting to relax. For a while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The sheriff's words had settled between them, leaving something that felt almost like closure. The chaos that had brought them together had ended not in punishment, but in peace. Rex broke the silence first. You know, he said slowly, his voice rough but calmer. "Most folks I meet in this world, they'd rather see me in handcuffs than talk to me." Keanu looked toward the horizon. "Maybe you've just been meeting the wrong kind of people." Rex gave a weak smile, rubbing at the back of his neck. "Yeah, maybe. Still feels strange, though, having someone look at me and not see trouble." Keanu turned his head toward him, his tone gentle. "We all look like trouble when we're carrying too much pain." Rex's eyes glistened again, but he didn't cry this time. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Guess I'm tired of carrying it alone." Keanu nodded. "Then you don't have to anymore." That simple statement carried more weight than any long conversation could have. Rex let the words sink in. They weren't dramatic, just true, and that truth hit harder than anything else that day. He kicked a small pebble with his boot, staring at it roll away into the sand. "You know, when the sheriff pulled up, I thought I was done for. Thought I'd be sitting in the back of his car, another guy with a record and a bad temper. But he saw what happened, and he didn't see a criminal. He saw a man." Keanu smiled faintly. "Because that's what you are. A man who's learning." The headlights from Assam. Passing truck briefly lit up the two of them, then faded into the distance, leaving the sound of the engines echoing softly across the desert. The night felt lighter now, like something invisible had lifted from the road itself. Rex looked up at the stars beginning to appear. "You know, if my brother were here, he'd probably laugh at me right now. Said I always made things harder than they had to be." Keanu chuckled quietly. "Maybe he'd say you finally got it right this time." Rex nodded, smiling through the ache. "Yeah, maybe he would." They stood in silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was healing. The flashing red and blue lights were gone, replaced by the calm of twilight, by the road stretching forward like a promise. Keanu placed his helmet back on. "Ready to head back?" Rex looked at him, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Yeah, but this time, I'll follow your lead." And as they both started their engines, the hum of forgiveness filled the night. The night had settled over the desert like a soft blanket, the last traces of sunset fading behind the mountains. A faint breeze drifted across the open highway, carrying the scent of dry sage and gasoline. Keanu stood by his motorcycle, adjusting his gloves. Rex sat quietly on his brother's bike, head lowered, his posture no longer rigid with anger. The red dust that clung to his jacket now looked almost peaceful in the pale glow of the moon. Keanu turned toward him. "Town's about 15 miles ahead," he said. "You should get some rest. Grab something to eat." Rex hesitated. "Yeah, maybe." He looked down at the road, then back at Keanu. "You heading that way too?" Keanu nodded. "I'll ride with you." For a moment, Rex didn't answer. Then, slowly, he nodded back. "All right." The two engines came alive at once, their low rumbles blending together. Keanu led the way, and Rex followed just behind. The road stretched ahead in a long silver ribbon, under the moonlight. The earlier tension that had hung in the air was gone, replaced by something quiet and heavy acceptance. The night air was cooler now. The stars above shimmered like scattered embers. Keanu rode with his back straight, his movements smooth and deliberate. Behind him, Rex's posture changed, little by little. His shoulders dropped, his grip on the handlebars loosened. His breathing fell into rhythm with the hum of the road. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of unspoken words, the kind only riders understood, the kind that came when two engines roared together in peace instead of conflict. They passed an old sign that read, "Welcome to Holbrook Population 5024. Ahead, a few neon lights flickered weakly in the distance. It wasn't much of a town, but it was enough a place to pause, to breathe. Keanu slowed as they entered the edge of the main street. Storefronts were dark except for one small cafe near a gas station. A flickering sign buzzed faintly. "Open 24 hours. He turned into the parking lot and shut off his engine. Rex followed, pulling in beside him. For a moment, neither moved. The ticking of cooling engines filled the silence. Rex glanced at Keanu, unsure what came next. Keanu unstrapped his helmet and smiled faintly. "Coffee's better here than it looks," he said. "Come on." Rex nodded, slipping off his bike. His boots crunched softly against the gravel as they walked toward the cafe door. Inside, the quiet hum of an old jukebox played a slow country song. The lights were dim, the air smelled faintly of coffee and worn leather. The waitress behind the counter looked up, recognition flashing across her face, but she said nothing. She simply smiled and gestured toward an empty booth near the window. They sat down side by side, not as strangers anymore, but as two men who had shared something that didn't need to be explained. The hum of the jukebox faded into the background as the door swung shut behind them. The air inside was cool, carrying the faint aroma of brewed coffee and old wood. The cafe was nearly empty, except for a trucker reading a newspaper at the far end and an elderly couple quietly sharing a piece of pie. Everything about the place felt slow, timeless, and safe. Keanu leaned his helmet against the wall beside him. The silence that settled between him and Rex wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that understood what words would only ruin. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a voice softened by years of night shifts, approached with a polite smile. "What can I get you boys tonight?" she asked. Keanu looked up. "Black coffee," he said simply. Rex hesitated before answering. "Just water, ma'am." Her smile widened slightly, though her eyes lingered on him a second longer, sensing the exhaustion behind his calm tone. "Coming right up," she said before walking back toward the counter. Rex watched her go, his hands clasped together on the table. He could still feel the vibration of the motorcycle in his palms, as if the road was still under him. After a while, he spoke quietly. "Feels weird sitting here. Feels like I shouldn't be calm yet." Keanu nodded. "Peace doesn't always feel right at first. You get used to noise. It feels strange when it stops." Rex looked down, letting the words sit. "Guess that's true," he said softly. "I've been riding like the world owed me something. But I think all this time, I've been trying to outrun myself." Keanu's eyes lifted toward him. Not judging, just listening. "And tonight?" Rex gave a small shrug. "Maybe I finally stopped long enough to notice I'm still alive." The waitress returned with their drinks. She set the coffee in front of Keanu and the glass of water before Rex. Her movements were gentle, almost reverent. "You two look like you've had quite a ride," she said lightly. Keanu smiled. "Yeah, you could say that." She smiled back, her eyes flicking briefly to Keanu's face in recognition. "You're him, aren't you?" she whispered. "But don't worry, I won't say anything. Appreciate that," Keanu said softly. "Tonight's not about that." The waitress nodded and stepped away, giving them their space. Rex took a long drink of water, the coolness running down his throat like relief itself. "You know," he said after a pause, "I used to think strength meant not breaking down, but maybe it's just getting back up again." Keanu lifted his cup, his voice calm. "Maybe it's knowing when to stop fighting everything." The two men sat in silence again, two riders in a small desert cafe, finding a kind of peace that neither had gone looking for but both had needed. The minutes drifted by quietly. Outside, the wind stirred a thin veil of dust across the parking lot. A neon sign buzzed faintly against the glass, its reflection shimmering on the tabletop between them. Rex sat with his shoulders lowered, the tension that once defined him now replaced by something gentler stillness. Keanu sipped his coffee, his gaze resting on the road beyond the window. It stretched endlessly into the dark, the same road that had carried anger hours ago and was now carrying peace. Rex finally broke the silence, his voice low. "You ever get tired of people looking at you like you're some kind of hero?" Keanu smiled slightly. "I don't think of myself that way." "Yeah, but they do," Rex said. "Back there, even the sheriff knew your name. Everyone expects you to be perfect." Keanu looked down into his cup. "Perfection's an illusion. People see what they want to see. All I can do is try to be decent when it counts." Rex studied him for a moment. "And tonight counted?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, it did." Rex leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "You could have left me on that road. Most people would have, but you didn't." Keanu's tone was calm, almost reflective. Leaving someone in pain never helps. We all end up on the same road eventually. Might as well help each other find our way home. Rex looked down at his hands, then out the window at the row of bikes parked in the glow of the streetlight. He used to say something like that, he murmured. My brother said life's not about where you ride, it's who rides beside you. Keanu smiled softly. Sounds like he was a good man. Rex nodded. He was. I just wish I'd told him that while I still could. The two men sat quietly again, the only sound the low hum of an old ceiling fan and the distant clink of dishes in the kitchen. After a moment, Keanu finished his coffee and set the mug down gently. You'll find a way to tell him, he said. Not with words, with how you live. Rex looked up at him, his eyes steady now. You really believe that? Keanu nodded. I do. The waitress returned one last time with the check, though Keanu had already left enough bills on the table to cover them both. She looked at them for a second and said softly, You two take care of each other out there. Rex gave her a polite nod. We will. Outside, the night was quiet again. They walked back toward their bikes, engines cooling in the still air. Rex glanced over at Keanu. So, where to now? Keanu smiled faintly. Wherever the road leads. But tonight, we ride easy. They started their engines together. The sound filled the night like a heartbeat, steady, peaceful, alive. Two riders side by side, leaving behind the chaos that brought them together and carrying forward something far greater than forgiveness. The night sky outside the diner had deepened into a soft shade of violet, the last traces of daylight fading behind the far hills. Inside, the glow from the hanging lamps cast long golden streaks across the floor, and the glass window beside their booth reflected the two men sitting in silence. The hum of the refrigerator and the slow ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds left. Rex leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. His reflection looked older than he remembered, eyes weary, shoulders heavy. He exhaled slowly. You know, we used to stop at places like this, he said quietly. Me and my brother. We'd race across the state lines, see who could find the best diner coffee. I used to tease him for ordering pancakes at midnight. He paused, the faintest smile crossing his face before fading. He'd tell me I was too serious for my own good. Guess he was right. Keanu nodded, resting his arms on the table but saying nothing. He could feel that Rex needed space to let the words find their way out. Rex's eyes softened as he stared into the distance. That weekend he died. We were supposed to ride together. I promised him I'd meet him at the canyon by sunrise. But we got into this stupid fight the night before about money, about pride, about nothing. I told him to ride without me. He did. His voice trembled slightly. And I never saw him again. The weight of that confession hung heavy in the air. Rex rubbed his hands together, the sound rough against the quiet. The cops said he lost control on a curve, probably hit a patch of gravel. They said it was quick, like he didn't even have time to brake. His throat tightened. But I keep thinking, if I'd been there, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe he'd still be here. Keanu's gaze stayed steady, warm, but filled with the kind of empathy that doesn't need words. Rex laughed bitterly. You ever feel like life's just waiting for you to mess up so it can take what you love most? Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked out the same window, the highway lights reflecting off the glass. I used to think that, he said quietly, for a long time. Rex turned toward him, listening closely. Keanu continued, his tone low and even. There was a time I lost people I loved, people who shaped who I was. I tried to figure out why, tried to find meaning in it. But I learned something. It's not about what life takes. It's about what we choose to keep living for. Rex's breath caught. The silence after that was heavy, but not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that gives a man permission to finally feel what he's been avoiding. The golden light from the diner lamps flickered gently across the table as the two men sat facing each other. Rex leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes unfocused, lost somewhere between guilt and memory. I keep thinking about that night, he said quietly. I told him to grow up, told him to stop wasting gas, stop dreaming about long rides and open skies. He laughed it off, like he always did. He said, "You're just scared of being happy." Rex's voice caught as he exhaled. And he was right. I was angry at everything. Life, work, myself. I couldn't stand how easy he made things look. I told him we'd ride together when I felt like it. He left without me. His hand tightened around the edge of the table. And then I got the call. The one that changes everything. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He let the words spill out like a confession that had been waiting for air. There was no judgment in his face, just patience, the kind that came from someone who understood what silence could heal. Rex shook his head slowly. I see that curve in my dreams every night. The gravel, the guardrail, the headlights. It's like I'm there watching, but I can't stop it. He rubbed his hands together, trying to wipe away the invisible weight pressing on them. And when I wake up, it's like he's still gone, and I'm still too late. Keanu looked out the window, his reflection calm against the fading night. "You can't change the past," he said softly, "but you can decide how much of it you'll carry forward." Rex frowned. "How do you do that? How do you carry something like this without letting it crush you?" Keanu turned back to him, eyes thoughtful. "You don't try to carry the pain. You carry the love instead." Rex blinked, confused. Keanu continued, his voice quiet but steady. "The world doesn't take from us to punish us. Sometimes it teaches us how to hold on differently. Your brother's not gone. He's in every mile you ride, every breath you take when you stop to remember him instead of running from him." The words hung in the air, soft but unshakable. Rex looked down, tears gathering again, but this time they weren't sharp with anger. They were clean, freeing. He nodded slowly, voice breaking. "You really think he'd forgive me?" Keanu gave a small smile. "He already has. The hard part is forgiving yourself." Rex pressed a hand to his chest, breathing deeply. For the first time in weeks, his body didn't feel like a cage. The world outside the window no longer looked like a punishment. It looked like a chance. The diner had grown quieter as the night deepened. The elderly couple had left, the jukebox had gone silent, and only the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the space. The golden glow through the window had faded into the soft silver of moonlight. Keanu and Rex sat there, two men surrounded by quiet, bound not by words but by truth. Rex leaned back against the booth, the exhaustion of weeks written across his face. Yet, beneath that fatigue, something lighter was beginning to take shape, something that looked like peace. "You ever stop missing them?" he asked softly. Keanu shook his head. "No," he said after a moment. "You just start, learning to live with the missing. It becomes a part of you. It hurts less, but it never disappears, and maybe it shouldn't." Rex nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can ever ride without thinking of him." "You shouldn't try to forget," Keanu replied. "Every time you start that bike, he rides with you. Every road you take now, he takes too." Rex's lips quivered into the faintest smile. He'd like that. He always said the road was the only place he felt free. Keanu looked out the window again. The reflection of their motorcycles shimmered faintly under the streetlight outside. "Freedom isn't about forgetting the pain," he said quietly. "It's about not letting it own you anymore." Rex took another breath, long and steady this time. The heaviness that had clung to his chest since his brother's death began to loosen. He could finally look at the road outside without seeing only loss. "You really think the world isn't out to punish us?" he asked, his tone tentative but searching. Keanu smiled gently. "I think the world gives us both joy and pain to teach us how strong love really is. You wouldn't hurt this much if you hadn't loved that deeply. That's not punishment, that's proof of who you are." Rex lowered his head, eyes glistening, but his tears no longer fell from despair, they came from release. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not walking away and for saying what I didn't know I needed to hear." Keanu gave a quiet nod, the corners of his mouth softening. "You don't owe me thanks. Just keep riding ride for both of you." Rex looked up at him, his eyes clearer than they had been since the day of the crash. "I will," he said firmly. The two men sat a little longer, letting the silence hold the weight of what had been said. Outside, the wind brushed gently against the window, carrying the sound of the desert, a whisper of endings and beginnings. And for the first time, in a long time, Rex didn't feel haunted by the past. He felt ready for the miles ahead. The rain came slowly, like a whisper on the edge of the night. A faint roll of thunder echoed somewhere beyond the desert hills. Inside the small diner, the air felt different, calmer, softer. The anger, the grief, and the tension that had filled the space had dissolved into something else, something like stillness. Keanu finished the last sip of his coffee and reached for the napkin beside his cup. He took a pen from the waitress's counter and began to write. His handwriting was small, careful, deliberate. When he was done, he folded the napkin once and slid it across the table toward Rex. Rex frowned slightly. "What's this?" Keanu leaned back, resting his elbows on the booth. "A contact for a local grief support group," he said. "And there's another number on there. It's for a veterans ride event I help sponsor every year. Good people. They ride for brothers they've lost. You don't have to do this alone." Rex stared down at the napkin like it was something fragile. The ink smudged slightly where his fingers brushed it. He looked at Keanu with disbelief. "You're serious? You don't even know me." Keanu nodded. "That doesn't matter. Pain's the same no matter who carries it." Rex let out a shaky laugh, part disbelief, part gratitude. "You really think talking to strangers is gonna fix this?" Keanu's tone stayed gentle. "It won't fix it, but it helps you keep moving. You already did the hardest part tonight. You stopped." Rex's eyes softened, and for a second, he didn't look like a man burdened by guilt. He looked like someone who could heal. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Keanu paused before answering. "Because someone once did it for me." Rex blinked. The words hit with quiet power. The rain began to tap gently against the diner windows, each drop adding rhythm to the silence between them. The waitress passed by, refilling a coffee cup 2 tables down. But she didn't interrupt. She could sense the gravity of what was unfolding. Keanu glanced at the napkin again, then looked at Rex. "You don't have to call them tonight," he said. "But keep that with you. When the road feels too long, when you start to forget what your brother stood for, read it again. Remember that someone out there's waiting to ride with you." Rex looked at the napkin as if it were something more than words. It was a bridge between 2 broken lives, one finding peace, the other learning how. He swallowed hard, nodding once. "All right," he said softly. "I'll keep it." Keanu smiled faintly. "Good." He slid out of the booth and stood, placing a few bills on the table. "That's for both of us," he said, "and tell the lady to keep the change." Rex started to protest, but Keanu stopped him with a small wave of his hand. "It's fine," he said. "You've paid enough for tonight." Outside, the first flashes of lightning glowed faintly behind the clouds, promising rain. Keanu reached for his helmet and headed toward the door. Rex watched him go, the napkin still clutched in his hand. The rain picked up as Keanu pushed open the diner door. Cool air swept in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and relief. He stepped out under the awning, adjusting the strap of his helmet. Behind him, Rex remained seated, staring at the napkin in his hand, as though it held a secret he couldn't yet believe. He turned it over once, tracing the ink with his thumb. The writing was clean, steady, unpretentious. 2 phone numbers, one for a grief support group, another for something called Ride for the Fallen. Beneath it, Keanu had written 5 simple words. "You don't have to ride alone." Rex stood, folding the napkin carefully, as if afraid it might tear. He stuffed it into his jacket pocket, grabbed his helmet, and walked out into the cooling rain. The first drops kissed the hot metal of the bikes, hissing softly. Keanu was already by his motorcycle, helmet in hand, looking out at the empty road that shimmered under the streetlight. Rex stopped beside him. "You really do this? Sponsor these rides?" Keanu nodded. "Every year. Started with a few friends. Some of them were veterans, some just riders trying to make peace with the past." We ride to remember the ones we lost, and to help the ones still here. Rex tilted his head, water streaking across his cheek. Sounds like something my brother would have loved. Keanu smiled. Then ride for him. You'll know when it's time. Rex looked down, kicking lightly at a small puddle forming near the curb. The reflection of the neon sign rippled with the movement. You don't even know what this means to me, he said softly. That someone like you would care. Keanu shook his head. We're not that different, Rex. We all break, we all heal. The road just gives us the space to do both. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, rolling over the desert. The rain began to fall harder now, but neither of them moved. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, letting the storm wash away the heat and the weight of everything that had come before. Finally, Keanu slid his helmet on, his voice steady through the sound of the rain. Take care of yourself, brother. Rex's throat tightened. He nodded, his eyes glistening under the dim light. I will. I promise. Keanu straddled his bike, started the engine, and revved it gently. The sound was deep and even, echoing off the wet pavement. Then he looked over once more, giving Rex a short nod before pulling out onto the road. Rex stood there, watching the red taillight disappear into the mist. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the napkin, and looked at it again. The ink had blurred slightly from the rain, but the words were still legible, still alive. He clutched it tightly, pressing it to his chest. For the first time in the complete days, his heart didn't feel empty. The thunder rolled again, soft and low, as if the sky itself had decided to cry with him. And in that moment, Rex knew he wouldn't ride alone anymore. 3 days later, the sky above Holbrook was gray and heavy with rain. Rex parked his motorcycle in front of a small brick building with a faded sign that read, Grief Support Circle, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. He sat on his bike for a long moment, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The napkin Keanu had given him was folded neatly in his jacket pocket. He'd read it a dozen times since that night, but tonight, something in him finally decided to follow through. When he walked inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. Folding chairs were arranged in a loose circle. A whiteboard on the wall read, Tonight's topic, Holding On Without Holding Back. About a dozen people were already seated, older men, a few women, one young guy with a prosthetic leg, and a middle-aged woman clutching a photo frame. At the far end of the room stood a man with broad shoulders and kind eyes, his gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. Welcome, brother, the man said with a warm nod. I'm Tom Herrera. Glad you could join us. Rex hesitated before sitting down. His jacket was still wet from the ride, and he felt out of place, like an intruder in a sacred space. Tom must have noticed, because he smiled. You don't have to say a word if you don't want to. Just listen tonight. That's enough. As the session began, people spoke one by one. A woman shared how she'd lost her husband in a car accident. A young man talked about his father who'd never come home from deployment. Each story carried its own weight, but what struck Rex most was how no one tried to fix anyone else. They just listened. No judgment, no pity, just shared pain. When it came to Rex's turn, he hesitated. His palms were damp, his throat dry. Pass, he muttered. Tom nodded with understanding and moved on without pressing him. By the end of the meeting, Rex still hadn't spoken, but something inside him had shifted. He lingered as others left, watching them hug, exchange numbers, and promise to meet again next week. Tom approached, handing him a cup of coffee. You made the hardest step, you know, he said. Rex smirked faintly. By showing up? Exactly, Tom said. You can't heal if you keep riding past the places that hurt. Those words echoed in Rex's mind long after he left the building. That night, he didn't ride straight home. He pulled over by the highway, parked under the neon light of an old motel sign, and sat in silence. For once, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. He pulled the napkin out again, smoothing the creases. The ink was fading, but the words were still clear. You don't have to ride alone. And for the first time, he believed it. The following week, Rex showed up again. This time, he didn't sit near the door like a man waiting for an excuse to leave. He took a seat closer to the middle of the circle. The group greeted him with quiet nods and warm smiles, the kind that said he belonged without needing to prove it. Tom Herrera, the facilitator, gave him a small pat on the shoulder as he passed. "Glad you're back, brother," Tom said. Rex nodded, his voice low. "Didn't think I would be." "That's how it starts," Tom replied with a grin. One meeting at a time. As people began to share, Rex listened more closely than before. Each story was a mirror, reflecting pieces of his own pain. Different lives, same ache. There was an older biker named Clyde who had lost his wife to cancer, a single mother named Denise who carried her son's dog tags around her neck, and a teenager named Jake who didn't say much but always showed up. When Tom finally looked toward Rex and asked, "You feel like talking tonight?" Something inside him said yes. He took a deep breath. "I lost my brother," he said simply. The words came out steadier than he expected. "We were supposed to ride together that weekend. I told him not to go. I was angry over nothing." He didn't make it back. The room went still, the kind of silence that listens with both ears and heart. Rex swallowed hard and continued. "I met someone a few days ago, someone who didn't yell, didn't judge, just listened. A Hollywood guy, actually." That made a few people smile. One man chuckled. "What, like an actor?" Rex nodded. "Yeah, you'd probably know his name. But that's not what mattered. What mattered was how he didn't treat me like I was broken. He just sat there, asked if I wanted water." The group laughed softly, but not mockingly. Tom nodded, eyes warm. "Sounds like you met a good soul." Rex smiled faintly. "Yeah, guess I did." After that night, Rex kept showing up. Each week, he spoke a little more, listened a little deeper. He started remembering things about his brother. The good memories, not just the final moment. The way they'd race across the highway. The way his brother would sing loudly and off-key just to make him laugh. The guilt began to loosen its grip, replaced by gratitude. By the fourth week, Tom approached him after the session. "We're short a volunteer for Saturday," he said. "We're rebuilding old bikes for underprivileged teens. Some of them lost parents in the service. You good with a wrench?" Rex chuckled. "That's about the only thing I'm good with." "Then you're perfect for the job," Tom said. That Saturday morning, Rex showed up at the community garage on the edge of town. The place smelled of oil and metal, and laughter bounced off the concrete walls. He met kids who looked at the half-finished motorcycles like they were magic. One boy, maybe 15, asked, "You ever ride one of these before?" Rex smiled. "Every chance I get." He spent the day teaching the boy how to tighten bolts, how to polish chrome, how to listen to the rhythm of an engine like a heartbeat. By the end of the afternoon, the boy grinned and said, "When I ride mine one day, I'm gonna remember this." Those words hit Rex like sunlight after a long winter. He realized he wasn't just fixing bikes, he was fixing himself. As the weeks went on, the others noticed the change too. The man who once stormed through life with anger in his eyes now carried calm in his steps. He laughed easily. He stayed late to help. He talked about his brother, not with guilt, but pride. People in town began to whisper about him, the biker who had turned his pain into purpose. Someone even mentioned the story of the Hollywood guy who helped a stranger on Route 66. And so a quiet message began to spread. One act of calm can reroute a man's entire life. A week later, the story began to move in quiet circles around the town. People at the diner talked about it in passing the man who had once shouted on the highway, now volunteering at the community garage. The rumor came with a name attached, and it wasn't his. It was the man who changed everything with one act of calm. Lila Morgan first heard the story from a retired firefighter at a local coffee shop. She was a small-town journalist, mid-30s, sharp-eyed but soft-spoken, the kind of reporter who believed the best stories came from people, not headlines. She'd written about storms, veterans, and farmers losing crops to drought. But this sounded different. "A movie star, right?" she asked. "Keanu Reeves?" The old man nodded. "That's what folks are saying. Happened just outside town. Guy nearly decked him, and Reeves just offered him water. Next thing you know, the biker's helping kids fix old bikes. If that ain't a story, I don't know what is. Lila smiled faintly. No, that's not just a story. That's a lesson. That afternoon, she started making calls. It didn't take long to trace the event. The sheriff confirmed he'd responded to a disturbance near Route 66, though he laughed when she asked for details. Disturbance is a big word, he said. Looked more like a miracle to me. Within 2 days, Lila found herself driving toward Los Angeles, hoping to track down Keanu Reeves himself. The receptionist at his motorcycle company politely said, "He doesn't give interviews about personal matters." But Lila left her card anyway, certain her story had more to do with people than fame. A day later, she received a call. A man's calm voice came through the line. "Miss Morgan, I got your message. Keanu said, if you want to talk, he'll meet you at the shop tomorrow morning." The next day, she arrived at a modest garage tucked in a quiet industrial block. Inside, Keanu was wiping grease from his hands, standing beside a half-assembled motorcycle. He looked surprised that someone would want to talk about something he'd rather forget. Lila introduced herself and smiled. "I heard you stopped a fight without throwing a single punch." He chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it." She tilted her head. "So what really happened out there?" He leaned against the workbench, thinking. A man was angry. He had every reason to be. He'd lost someone, and he didn't know what to do with the pain. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't add to it." Lila's expression softened. "And that made all the difference, didn't it?" Keanu shrugged lightly. "He did the hard part. I only offered water." That line stopped her for a moment. She repeated it quietly, as if to herself. "You only offered water." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's all people need." Lila stood there, pen motionless over her notebook, struck by the simplicity of his words. "You only offered water." It sounded almost biblical in its humility. She'd interviewed politicians, soldiers, and activists, but no one had ever made kindness sound so effortless. "You know," she said softly, "most people would have walked away or yelled back." Keanu gave a small smile. "That's the thing. The world's already full of noise. Someone's got to stay quiet long enough for the truth to speak." Lila nodded, realizing she was in the presence of a man who didn't need to defend his image because his actions had already done that. "The man you helped," she asked, "does he know what this story's become?" Keanu shook his head. "It's his story, not mine. I just hope he's doing better." Lila smiled. "He is. I met him at the garage. He didn't know I'd be writing about you, but he talked about a stranger who saw him instead of judging him. He said that moment turned everything around." Keanu paused, a quiet look of relief in his eyes. "Then that's enough. You don't need to write about me." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe not about you, but about what you did and what it means." He chuckled softly. "If it helps someone else stop and breathe before they hurt someone or themselves, then sure, write whatever you want. But don't call it a story about a celebrity. Call it what it was." She lifted her pen. And what was it? The day anger met kindness. That became the headline. When the article went live 2 days later, it spread like wildfire across social media. The headline alone drew millions of clicks. "The day anger met kindness. How Keanu Reeves turned a biker's rage into redemption." But the story itself wasn't about fame or drama, it was about humanity. Lila's words painted a vivid picture. Two strangers on a desert road. One broken by grief. The other armed only with patience. She quoted Keanu's quiet response. "He did the hard part. I only offered water." And she ended it with a reflection that struck readers deeply. Maybe the world doesn't need louder heroes. Maybe it just needs calmer ones. Within hours, the story was shared by millions. Hashtags like "The day anger met kindness" and "offer water" began trending. Celebrities reposted it. Veterans groups shared it, and teachers read it aloud in classrooms as a lesson in empathy. The internet, for once, wasn't angry. It was inspired. People commented with stories of their own moments of restraint, of kindness that changed someone's day. A truck driver wrote, "Maybe patience really is power." A single mother commented, "I showed this to my son. He said he wants to be like the man who stayed calm." And through it all, Keanu stayed silent. No interviews, no public appearances. When asked for comment, his assistant simply replied, "He's just happy the story gave people hope." By the week's end, the article had over 10 million shares. Lila sat in her small newsroom, overwhelmed by the response, and whispered the title again to herself. The day anger met kindness. It was no longer just a story. It had become a reminder to the world, and to anyone still fighting their battles in silence, that real strength doesn't shout, it listens. The morning sky stretched wide and clear, painted in soft shades of gold and blue. The desert air carried a gentle chill, the kind that promised a good day for riding. Rows of motorcycles lined the dusty parking lot outside a community center near Winslow, Arizona. Chrome gleamed under the sun, engines rumbled low, and riders stood shoulder to shoulder, veterans, widows, brothers, and friends, each wearing leather vests patched with names of those they'd lost. It was the annual memorial ride for the Fallen, the same event Keanu had mentioned to Rex weeks earlier. Riders had gathered from across the state to honor the ones who could no longer ride beside them. Among the crowd, near the end of the line of bikes, stood Rex Dalton. His jacket was cleaner now, the anger gone from his eyes. On the back of his vest, just below the old skull emblem, a new patch gleamed under the sun. It read, "In memory of Jake Dalton." He ran a hand over it and took a deep breath. This ride wasn't about grief anymore. It was about keeping a promise. Engines started one by one, the sound rising into a deep, steady rhythm. Keanu's arch motorcycle rolled up near the front of the line. He wore the same worn leather jacket as before, his calm presence standing out even among hundreds of roaring engines. Rex smiled when he saw him, shaking his head in disbelief. "Didn't think you'd show," he said when Keanu approached. Keanu grinned. "You didn't think I'd miss your first memorial ride, did you?" Rex laughed, a sound that was lighter now. "Guess not." He paused, his voice lowering. "Feels different today, like he's riding with me." Keanu nodded. "He is." The event coordinator called everyone together, giving a short speech about remembrance, unity, and healing. Rex barely heard the words. His focus stayed on the patch over his heart, where Jake's name rested. When the call came to start the engines, the air filled with the thunder of hundreds of bikes igniting at once. It was powerful, not angry but proud. Keanu and Rex rode side by side as the procession pulled out of the lot and onto the open road. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, the wind rushing past their helmets, the sun glinting off the chrome. There was no competition now, no shouting, no fury, just peace. They rode in perfect rhythm, two bikes moving as one. The road that had once been a place of confrontation was now a path of redemption. Every mile felt like a prayer for the brother who had fallen, and for the man who had finally found his way back. As they crested a long hill, Rex glanced over. Keanu gave him a small nod, no words needed. They both understood what that moment meant. The ride had begun, but for Rex, it wasn't just another journey. It was a beginning. The memorial ride wound through the desert plains, miles of riders moving together in perfect rhythm. The roar of hundreds of engines was not loud in anger, but steady, like a living heartbeat. The air smelled of rain and gasoline, and for the first time in years, Rex felt something he hadn't known. He missed belonging. He kept his eyes on the road, the horizon glowing faintly with the rising sun. Every turn of the wheel, every gust of wind, seemed to carry his brother's name. He glanced over at Keanu, who rode effortlessly beside him. The same calm presence he had been that day on Route 66. There were no cameras, no fans, no spotlight, just two men, two motorcycles, and the long road ahead. As the procession slowed for a rest stop by a desert overlook, riders parked their bikes in neat rows. The group gathered near a flagpole where a banner fluttered with the words, "Ride for the Fallen." Tom Herrera stood at the front, microphone in hand. His voice carried strong and clear across the wind. "We ride, not to mourn, but to remember. We ride to remind the world that love never dies. It just finds new roads." The crowd cheered softly, their applause humble and heartfelt. Then Tom called for a few volunteers to share their stories. Rex hesitated at first, his hands shaking, but the sight of Keanu's calm nod gave him courage. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "My name's Rex Dalton," he began, his voice unsteady but real. "A few months ago, I was angry. Angry at life, angry at myself. I thought I'd lost everything worth living for. I almost made a mistake that day on the highway. I almost turned my pain into something ugly." The group listened, silent and attentive. Rex's eyes glistened as he continued. "But someone stopped me. Not by force, not by preaching, just by asking one question. Do you want some water?" He paused, swallowing hard. "That man is standing right there." Every head turned toward Keanu. He looked down modestly, shifting his gloves in his hands. Rex's voice trembled as he went on. "He didn't just save me from a fight. He saved me from myself. That day, I met a kind of strength I didn't know existed. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that listens. And because of that moment, I get to stand here today." Applause rippled softly through the crowd, mixed with the quiet rumble of idling engines. Keanu gave Rex a small nod, his expression warm but humble. When the noise settled, he said only one thing. "You did the hard part." Rex smiled through his tears. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have found the road again without you." The riders mounted their bikes once more. Engines roared to life as dust rose around them like smoke from a ceremonial fire. Keanu and Rex took their places near the front, side by side once again. As they pulled back onto the open highway, the sound of thunder rolled faintly behind them, not from the sky this time, but from the unity of hundreds of hearts beating together. The desert stretched wide and endless, no longer a place of fury, but of forgiveness. And, beneath the rising sun, the two men rode forward not toward fame or glory, but toward peace. In the weeks that followed the memorial ride, something unexpected began to happen. The story that had started on one lonely highway began to travel faster than any bike ever could. Across the country, motorcycle clubs, veterans groups, and community organizations started adopting the same message that had brought Rex back from the edge. They called it Ride with Heart. It began small, just a few riders showing up to the Holbrook grief group that Rex attended. But soon, the circle had to move from the community room to a larger hall. Old faces returned, new ones arrived, and the conversations changed. It wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about rebuilding, forgiveness, and learning how to carry the ones they'd lost with pride instead of pain. Rex sat in the same seat each week, greeting newcomers with a firm handshake and a calm voice. His once dark jacket now bore new patches, not of anger but of remembrance. The skull emblem on the back had been replaced with a red heart surrounded by silver wings, the symbol of the Ride with Heart movement. Tom Herrera stood at the front one evening, his voice full of pride. "You all remember when Rex first walked in here," he said with a grin. "Didn't say a word that first night. Now he's teaching half of you how to fix a carburetor and half the rest how to fix your tempers." The group laughed softly, and Rex's face flushed with humble pride. He raised his hand. "I just remind them what someone reminded me. Pain's a good teacher, but only if you let it make you better." That became one of the group's mottos. Written on the wall in black paint beside the heart and wings symbol, word spread through local biker clubs, and soon riders from neighboring towns began showing up to meetings. Some came for help, others just to listen. The movement grew beyond Arizona, reaching as far as New Mexico and Texas. Within months, there were Ride with Heart gatherings happening every weekend. Across the Southwest, Keanu, who had kept out of the spotlight since the story broke, quietly began supporting the cause in his own way. Without announcement or press, he set up a foundation under the same name dedicated to offering scholarships to the children of fallen riders. The first check went to the son of a man who had died helping a stranded motorist along Route 93. No fanfare, no ceremony, just an envelope in the mail signed with two simple words: "Keep writing." Rex learned about it later and couldn't help but smile. It was exactly the kind of thing Keanu would do. At the community garage, where he once worked with a handful of teens, there were now 20. They called him Coach Rex. He taught them everything from motorcycle safety to emotional control, how to take apart an engine and how to take apart anger before it exploded. One afternoon, a teenage boy asked, "Why do you do this every week?" Rex thought for a moment and said, "Because someone showed me what peace looks like. Now I just want to pass it on." And he meant it. Months passed, and the Ride with Heart movement became more than a slogan. It was a way of life. Motorcycle rallies that once centered around speed and power began to include moments of silence for those lost. Riders wore patches not just for their clubs, but for their cause. Across small towns and desert highways, murals began to appear, paintings of open roads, angel wings, and a single bottle of water resting on the asphalt. Rex continued to lead workshops at the community garage. He started a mentorship program called The Road Back, pairing experienced riders with young men struggling with anger, addiction, or grief. Every weekend, the sound of revving engines mixed with laughter and conversation. The same road that once led him to despair was now leading others toward hope. Tom Herrera often dropped by to help, usually with a box of coffee and a story about the old days. "You know," he told Rex one morning, "you've done something most folks never do. You turned your pain into a map for others." Rex smiled, wiping grease from his hands. "I just followed the road someone showed me." One afternoon, the local paper printed a photo on its front page. It showed a line of riders heading out of Holbrook, the desert stretching endlessly behind them. At the center of the line was Rex, his jacket gleaming with the heart and wings emblem. The caption read, "Ride with Heart, changing lives, 1 mile at a time." The article mentioned Keanu's quiet involvement, but only briefly. True to form, he had asked to remain in the background. Still, his presence rippled through every part of the movement. He'd send boxes of motorcycle parts, helmets for the kids, or handwritten notes to the support group. "Keep your wheels steady. Keep your hearts open." One night, as the group gathered for their monthly meeting, Tom announced a new initiative. "Starting this fall," he said, "the Ride with Heart Foundation will award scholarships to the sons and daughters of riders who gave everything to the road. And it's being funded by the man who taught us what patience really means." The room erupted in applause, though Rex simply lowered his head, smiling. He didn't need to ask who the donor was. Later, as the meeting ended, Rex stepped outside. The night air was cool and full of the hum of distant traffic. He looked up at the stars and thought about that day on the highway. The shouting, the dust, the bottle of water falling to the ground. He thought about how everything had changed in the space between two words. "You okay?" He exhaled deeply, the weight long gone from his chest. "Guess you were right, Jake," he whispered. "The road does bring you home." The hum of motorcycles in the distance sounded almost like applause, not for fame or heroism, but for quiet transformation. And somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, another rider slowed down just enough to remember that one act of calm could change everything. The ripples spread faster than anyone expected. What had started as a single act of compassion on a sun-bleached highway now captured headlines around the world. News outlets called it the water moment. Talk shows replayed Lila Morgan's article headline, "The Day Anger Met Kindness," while late-night hosts spoke about it between jokes and monologues. Clips of the story flooded social media. Morning news anchors described it as the antidote to the chaos of modern life. Bloggers called Keanu Reeves the quiet teacher we didn't know we needed. Hashtags like #Ride with Heart, #Offer Water, and #Kindness is Power began trending again, weeks after they first appeared. But while the world buzzed with praise, Keanu stayed silent. No interviews, no photo ops, no long statements. When reporters caught him outside his shop or on set, he simply smiled and said, "There's nothing new to say. The man did the real work." Producers from national talk shows called his agent daily. One promised him full airtime to spread his message. Another offered to donate to the foundation in exchange for an appearance. He declined them all. Instead, he sent a short written note that later went viral on its own. "Don't thank me," it read. "Thank the people who choose to forgive." Those 8 words were printed, shared, and quoted across television and social media. They appeared on posters, on t-shirts, on digital billboards in Times Square. Teachers used them in classrooms. Veterans organizations read them aloud during ceremonies. The words carried a quiet power because they reminded people that kindness doesn't need recognition, it just needs to be practiced. Meanwhile, the Ride with Heart Foundation grew faster than anyone expected. The story had driven thousands of donations from around the world. Families who had lost loved ones wrote letters thanking Keanu for giving them hope. One father from Oklahoma sent a photograph of his son in a helmet with the caption, "Rides, because you stayed calm." Lila Morgan, the reporter who had written the first article, was flooded with interview requests herself. She turned them down too. Instead, she appeared on a local station and said, "This isn't about celebrity. It's about what happens when a man decides to listen instead of react." The world just forgot what that looked like. In a world often addicted to outrage, this story was different. It wasn't dramatic, it was disarmingly simple. People were moved, not because Keanu had acted heroically, but because he hadn't. And that quiet refusal to play the part the world expected, that was what made it beautiful. Weeks turned into months, but the story refused to fade. The internet, usually quick to move on, seemed to linger this time. Comment sections under news posts filled not with cynicism, but gratitude. People shared their own stories of patience, moments when they'd chosen to listen instead of lash out. Teachers used the Ride with Heart motto in classroom lessons. Churches, biker clubs, and even high schools began hosting kindness rides, where strangers rode together to honor loved ones and practice empathy on the road. Through it all, Keanu remained in the background. When asked why he avoided the spotlight, he always gave the same quiet answer. "It's not my story. It belongs to everyone who chooses calm over chaos." But the world couldn't help turning him into a symbol. Magazine covers showed him beside his motorcycle with headlines like "The Man Who Redefined Strength." Late-night hosts spoke of him with awe. Only Keanu Reeves could start a national movement by offering water, one joked, and somehow still look humble doing it. The audience laughed, but beneath it, they understood. When paparazzi showed up at his garage, hoping for a reaction, Keanu greeted them politely, his hands stained with grease. "I don't have much to say," he told them. "If you want to help, donate to the Accent Foundation. It's doing good work." He gave them the website link on a small card and returned to fixing a bike. That clip, taken on a shaky cell phone, went viral within hours. Millions shared it, calling him the man who leads without trying. Someone online wrote, "In a world full of noise, Keanu teaches us that silence can roar." It became one of the most reposted quotes of the year. Meanwhile, Rex watched all of it from afar. He didn't like attention, but he loved seeing the good that had come from a single moment of grace. He sent Keanu an email one night that read, "You didn't just change my life, you gave a whole lot of people a second chance at theirs." Keanu replied with only one sentence, "You did that yourself. I just showed you the turn." In interviews about the foundation, Keanu refused to talk about the original incident. "The past is the past," he said. "What matters is what people are doing now." Tom, Rex, those kids at the garage. That's where the story really is. His humility made the world lean in even more. Newspapers called it the quiet revolution of kindness. Analysts on morning shows discussed how his restraint had reignited a national conversation about empathy. In a culture that rewards loudness, one anchor said, Keanu's calm has become contagious. Celebrities began to follow suit, donating anonymously, speaking softly, and citing his example. For once, goodness itself had gone viral. One journalist described it perfectly. He didn't sell an image, he lived it. He proved that decency isn't weakness, that compassion isn't passive. And in doing so, He reminded the world that kindness doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs consistency. That line became the closing statement of nearly every news segment about him. And through it all, Keanu went back to what he loved: quiet roads, long rides, simple days in the shop. Fame might have followed him, but peace was still his destination. As the year drew to a close, Ride with Heart held its first national memorial rally. Thousands of riders filled the highways, united under one simple motto: forgive, ride, and begin again. The cameras captured the vast sea of motorcycles cutting through the desert light, but what mattered wasn't the noise or the crowd, it was what it represented: a movement born from stillness. A world reminded that real strength doesn't shout, it listens. Winter sunlight poured softly through the high windows of Keanu's motorcycle garage, streaking across the concrete floor. Dust hung in the air, glowing faintly in the golden light. The place was quiet except for the gentle scrape of a polishing cloth against chrome. Rows of bikes stood like sentinels, some finished, some still in progress. Each one told a story. On the workbench, beside a set of tools, lay a stack of mail, most of it from fans or foundations asking for signatures or statements. Keanu flipped through them absently, sorting them into piles. Then one envelope caught his eye. It wasn't typed, just handwritten in uneven pen strokes. The return address said Holbrook, Arizona. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. The handwriting was rough but careful. The ink pressed hard into the page. It began simply, "Hey Keanu, I wasn't sure if I should write this, but I figured if I didn't, I'd regret it. It's been 6 months since that day on the highway. Feels like a lifetime ago. Back then, I thought I was one bad moment away from losing control for good. You know that better than anyone." Keanu paused, his fingers resting lightly on the paper. He could almost hear Rex's voice in the rhythm of the words, steady, humbled, honest. "I wanted to tell you something. My life's different now. The grief group's still going strong. Tom made me one of the mentors. Imagine that a guy who once screamed at a stranger for brushing his mirror, now teaching others how to breathe before they effective break. Life's strange that way." Keanu smiled faintly as he read on. "The foundation you started, Ride with Heart, it's saving lives, man. I've seen kids who thought they had no one end up with a family because of it. The scholarship fund? You should see the faces of those kids when they get their first bike helmet with their names stitched on it. You did that." He stopped for a moment, setting the paper down. The garage was silent, except for the low hum of the heater. He took a slow breath, then continued reading. "But I guess what I really want to say is thank you. Not for fixing me, because you didn't. You just reminded me I wasn't broken in the first place. I was just hurting, and I didn't know what to do with it. You asked me if I was okay when no one else had the guts or patience to ask. That changed everything." The words hit Keanu with quiet force. He ran a hand over his face, eyes glistening just slightly. "My brother's memory doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Now, when I ride, I feel him beside me. Every sunrise feels like a conversation we never finished. And every time I see someone angry or lost, I try to ask them the same thing you asked me. You okay, man?" Keanu smiled again, that small, knowing kind of smile that comes from peace rather than pride. Keanu continued reading, the sound of the paper faint against the still air. "I don't know if you believe in fate, but I think we were supposed to cross paths that day. Not because I needed saving, but because I needed reminding that decency still exists. You didn't talk down to me, didn't try to teach me a lesson. You just stood there and offered water. Simple as that. But that moment cracked something open inside me. It let the light in." Keanu leaned back against the workbench, the letter resting loosely in his hand. Outside, rain began to tap gently on the roof, soft and steady, like the rhythm of the road they once shared. "I wanted you to know I'm doing all right. I still ride every week with the group. I wear my brother's patch, and I wear that red heart with wings right next to it. Some days, I help at the garage with the kids. We built a bike last month for a teenager named Leo. He lost his dad in a crash, same as me. When he sat on that bike for the first time, I saw the same look in his eyes I used to see in mine, except his was filled with hope. Keanu's lips curved in a quiet smile. He could almost picture Rex standing there, the desert wind blowing across his jacket, that new patch shining proudly in the sun. Anyway, I won't take up much more of your time. I just wanted to say one more thing before I go. People always talk about heroes like they're bigger than life, but what you did wasn't big, it was human. And maybe that's what this world's been missing. So if anyone ever tells you that you changed me, tell them the truth. You didn't fix me. You reminded me I wasn't broken. The words sat at the bottom of the page, underlined once, as if Rex wanted to make sure they'd stay. Keanu lowered the letters slowly, reading that last line again. You reminded me I wasn't broken. For a long time, he stood there in silence, the rain outside growing heavier. He didn't move, didn't rush to file the letter away. He simply let the words sink in, filling the space around him like warmth after a long winter. Finally, he folded the paper gently and placed it on the workbench beside a small metal tray. Next to it lay a half-finished wrench job, one of his custom motorcycles, gleaming under the soft light. He reached for a clean cloth and began to polish the chrome, slow and methodical, the same way he always did when something important needed to settle in his heart. As he worked, the reflection of the polished surface caught the letter's edge, its white paper glowing faintly in the light. The sound of rain mixed with the soft, rhythmic motion of his hands. Keanu didn't say a word. He didn't need to. A small, peaceful smile crossed his face, one of quiet gratitude, the kind that speaks louder than anything else. The man who once asked, "You okay, man?" was okay himself. And somewhere down the road, Rex Dalton was too. The sun rose over the same stretch of highway where everything had once begun. A golden light spilled across the desert, cutting through the thin morning mist that hovered over the asphalt. The road, once empty and silent, now pulsed with life. The rumble of hundreds of motorcycles filled the air, deep, steady, unified. 1 year had passed since the day Keanu Reeves had met a furious biker on this road. Now, the same place had become a symbol of something larger than either of them could have imagined. Rows upon rows of riders gathered under a wide canvas banner stretched between two flagpoles. It read in bold red letters, "Ride with Heart," in memory of Jake Dalton. Bikers from all over the Southwest had come, veterans with weathered faces, young riders with freshly painted helmets, mothers carrying photos of loved ones, and kids sitting proudly behind their parents on smaller bikes. Leather vests shimmered with patches sewn carefully over the years, and every single one bore the same emblem, a red heart with silver wings. Rex Dalton stood near the front, adjusting his gloves and tightening the strap on his helmet. His brother's patch rested over his heart. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar sting of emotion rise but not overwhelm him. Tom Herrera, now a beloved mentor for many, stepped up to the small podium set near the starting line. His voice carried strong across the wind. "Today, we don't just ride for the fallen," he said. "We ride for the living, for every soul that's still finding their way back." The crowd nodded, some bowing their heads, others raising their hands to their hearts. Rex scanned the line of riders. There were hundreds, maybe more than he'd ever seen before. Yet his eyes searched for one man. Somewhere in the sea of helmets and chrome, he knew Keanu was there. At the back of the procession, near the curve of the road, Keanu sat astride his black arch motorcycle. His jacket bore no name, no rank, no mark of recognition, just the same red heart and silver wings as everyone else. His helmet shielded his face, but his calm presence stood out even among the crowd. He didn't ride in front, didn't lead. He followed, quietly, humbly, exactly where he belonged. Tom lifted his hand, signaling the start. The sound that followed was like thunder, hundreds of engines roaring to life in perfect unison. The vibration shook the ground, rolled through the air, and filled every heart within miles with a sense of unity that no speech could ever describe. As the line began to move, Rex kicked up his stand and joined the stream of riders, his engine blending with the chorus. Dust rose behind them, carried by the morning wind. And as they crossed the open desert, the same stretch of highway where pain had once erupted now glimmered beneath their wheels like a road reborn. The riders stretched for miles, a river of chrome and leather winding through the desert. The sunlight reflected off their helmets, flashing like stars against the endless blue sky. Every few miles, a flag waved by the roadside, each one bearing the names of lost loved ones. The air vibrated with the sound of engines and the rhythm of hundreds of hearts beating together in memory and peace. Rex led the group beside Tom, his posture calm, his movements steady. A year ago, this same road had nearly witnessed a fight born of anger and grief. Now, it carried nothing but unity. The rumble beneath him no longer felt like chaos, it felt like harmony. Each vibration reminded him of his brother, of all the people who had turned pain into purpose. When they reached the overlook, the same spot where Keanu had once offered him water, the riders began to park. One by one, engines shut off, and the desert returned to its quiet hum. The scent of dust and gasoline lingered in the air, mingled with the faint sweetness of wild sage carried by the wind. Rex dismounted, taking off his helmet. His hair was damp with sweat, but his sage face held peace. He turned and looked down the long line of riders still arriving, scanning the faces and helmets until he saw him, Keanu, climbing off his bike at the edge of the crowd, helmet still on, his movements unhurried and humble as ever. Rex made his way through the rows of parked bikes, nodding to friends as he passed. When he reached Keanu, he stopped a few steps away. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two men who had shared a road that neither would ever forget. Keanu removed his helmet, revealing that familiar calm smile. "It's a good turnout," he said. Rex laughed softly. "Better than I ever imagined. You did this, you know." Keanu shook his head. "No, you did. I just asked if you were okay." Rex's eyes glistened, his throat tight with emotion. "You didn't just save me from a fight," he said. "You saved me from myself." Keanu stepped closer and rested a hand on Rex's shoulder. "You found peace, brother. You just needed to remember what it looked like." Rex nodded slowly, his voice low but steady. "Then, I owe you for that reminder." Keanu smiled faintly. "Then pay it forward. That's how this keeps going." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filled with unspoken gratitude. The wind picked up, warm and soft, carrying with it the sound of laughter from the other riders gathering for photos and stories. Rex exhaled and looked out over the vast desert road stretching endlessly into the horizon. "You know," he said, "I think Jake would have loved this." Keanu followed his gaze. "He's here," he said quietly. Rex smiled through tears. "Yeah, he is." They both put their helmets back on, engines rumbling beneath them once more. As they rode off side by side, the crowd behind them cheered not loudly, but with reverence. Their laughter mingled with the wind as the sun dipped low across the desert, painting the road in gold. And as they disappeared over the horizon, one truth remained. Peace, once found, can carry forever. The day began as so many others had an open road, a steady engine, and the promise of freedom stretching endlessly ahead. But somewhere between the roar of motorcycles and the quiet of the desert, something deeper had taken root. What started as a moment of anger had grown into a movement of healing. One act of patience had turned into a legacy of compassion. The road was almost empty now. The memorial ride had ended hours earlier, and the sky above the Arizona desert burned in shades of orange and red. The sun, heavy and low, melted into the horizon like a final ember fading from a long fire. The world was quiet again, peaceful, still. Keanu rode alone, his motorcycle gliding effortlessly down the same highway where it all began. The wind brushed against his jacket, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and asphalt. Each mile was familiar, yet different. The same road that had once seen fury now carried peace. The same air that once vibrated with shouts now hummed with gratitude. He thought of Rex, of Tom, of all the people who had found something beautiful in the wake of pain. He thought of the kids in the garage, the scholarships, the rides, the growing brotherhood that now carried a single message across the world: ride with heart. It wasn't about bikes anymore. It was about the people who refused to let rage write their story. The desert stretched out endlessly before him, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had slowed. The hum of the engine, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the whisper of the wind, it all felt like one heartbeat, steady and whole. There was no applause, no cameras, no attention, just a man and his machine moving forward. The narrator's voice lingered softly in the air. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in how loudly we fight, but in how quietly we choose peace. Strength isn't measured in victory or dominance. It's measured in restraint, in the courage to stay calm when the world demands conflict. The story of the day anger met kindness had become something much greater than a viral article or a passing trend. It had become a reminder, a reflection of what humanity can still be when empathy leads the way. Keanu slowed his bike near the top of a hill, the desert below bathed in gold. In his rearview mirror, the sky reflected behind him, painted in fire and stillness. His own reflection stared back, calm, steady, free. He smiled faintly, twisting the throttle once more, the sound of the engine rising gently into the wind. And as the horizon swallowed him whole, the message lingered. Compassion doesn't need a stage. It just needs a moment. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of silver cutting through the crimson light of dusk. Keanu rode on, his silhouette framed against a blood-orange sky that burned with the last glow of the sun. The desert wind carried a hush, like the earth itself was listening. Every curve of the highway seemed to echo the same truth that had followed him since that day. Peace isn't found in silence. It's made by choice. Behind him, miles away, the memorial ride was still breaking down. Riders sharing handshakes and stories, strangers now bound like family. Rex had stayed late, talking with new faces, comforting others who had lost someone to anger, loss, or time. And when the evening began to fade, he looked toward the highway and whispered, "Ride safe, brother," knowing that somewhere out there, Keanu was already disappearing into the horizon. The world would go on talking about the story, the articles, the movement, the foundation, but the truth was simpler. What happened that day wasn't about fame or even forgiveness. It was about one man's decision to stay calm when everything around him begged for chaos. That choice had changed everything. The news called it the day anger met kindness, but to those who lived it, it was something even more powerful that called it day humanity remembered itself. People across the country began holding their own Ride with Heart events. Cities that had never seen motorcycle rallies suddenly had parades of riders wearing red heart patches. Teachers wrote essays about it in classrooms. Veterans' homes hung the motto on their walls. And in every story, every retelling, the message stayed the same. Real strength doesn't shout, it listens. Keanu's reflection shimmered in the rearview mirror as the sky deepened into purple. His hair whipped lightly beneath the helmet, and his eyes softened at the sight of the endless road stretching behind him. He didn't need to see where he had been to understand what it meant. He thought of the moment Rex had said, "You saved me from myself." That memory played in his mind, like a song carried by the wind. He hadn't set out to save anyone. He had just done what felt right, offered water to a man in pain. But sometimes, the smallest acts ripple farther than anyone can see. The desert air cooled, brushing gently against his hands as he loosened his grip on the handlebars. The engine purred steadily beneath him. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a heartbeat, a rhythm that reminded him that calm can move mountains if it's steady enough. Somewhere ahead, lightning flickered in the distance, lighting up the horizon like the faint pulse of the earth. He didn't speed up or slow down, he just rode, his breathing even, his heart at ease. For Keanu, the ride was never about distance, it was about direction. Forward, always forward. And for the world, his story had become more than a moment of decency. It had become proof that compassion is still stronger than anger, that kindness, even in silence, can echo louder than violence ever could. As the sun sank completely below the hills, his figure became a part of the landscape, fading into the glow of the last light. The desert swallowed the sound of his engine, leaving only the memory of movement, of peace in motion. Because sometimes, that's all the world needs to heal, a reminder that even in the harshest places, humanity can still choose gentleness. And somewhere out there, on that long, unending highway, a man rode beneath the sky, unburdened, unbroken, and finally free. If you believe the world needs more kindness like this, share this incredible story. What would you have done if you were in Keanu's place? Tell us in the comments. Your voice might inspire someone's change.